Tell them we're ready to get started. I call to order the meeting of the Cherry Hills Village City Council. This is our study session. It's 5:30 p.m. And we've called the study session on cellular service fiber informational presentation from H.R. Green. City Manager, would you like, or Jay?
Good evening, Mayor, members of council. Tonight from H.R. Green, we have Dave Zelnick and Ken Price with us to give us some in-depth background on cellular service, broadband, and anything related to that. So they have graciously come to speak to you and us about we'll start with the basic background, and then we'll leave some questions at the end, some time for questions and answers. Again, they won't have any specific answers about Cherry Hills Village, as we will need to put out an RFP and do a study on that. But they do have great knowledge and background in the entire broadband cellular service, and they are a great resource for us. So with that, I will turn it over.
Jay, Chris, thank you so much. Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council, David Zelenock from H.R. Green, and Ken Price, also from H.R. Green. I apologize, I wasn't sure that any of you would remember me, but Earl remembers me. I was actually here in this room on making a PowerPoint presentation. I found it was April of 2014. So Earl reminded me, he remembered me, and so apologies if some of the slides seem familiar, that Earl was going to come goose me probably and refresh your memories or my memories. So not in this room. For what little it's worth, I was at that time actually working over in the city of Centennial. You might have heard of it. I served in a number of positions there, Public Works Director, kind of what Jay did. Then I was asked to even serve for a while as the city manager of the city of Centennial, where I met Ken Price, who was then the IT director of the faraway city of Littleton. And I left Centennial for H.R. Green 7 years ago. I sweet-talked him into joining me, and we've been consulting with cities like Cherry Hills Village on projects that we've been working with and we're comfortable with. So that's a little bit of our background. But we have about 28, 29 slides. What we'd like to do maybe is walk you through, pardon us, because I tend not to be a geek that much, but there'll be some geeky talk. If we get too deep into the technology, please feel free to stop us. Chris, give me the wave off or something that tells me we're getting too deep in here. What I thought we might do, though, is spend about a half an hour.
If I can.
I'm sorry.
We'd really like this to be an interactive conversation.
Please.
So please interrupt, ask questions as we go. Tell us to speed up, slow down. Okay.
Ken doesn't mind being interrupted that much. So our first slide here is what are other cities doing and why. You are to be congratulated for having the vision, forethought of passing, you may recall, an SB 152 exemption not that long ago. What that does really is it allows Cherry Hills Village and 100 other cities across Colorado to engage in partnerships with the private sector for things related to fiber, broadband, telecommunications. I might point out that for whatever it's worth, just bragging rights, Longmont was the first of the 100 cities in Colorado to do that. We pushed it through. We were second in Centennial to push it through. And Centennial has kind of a watered-down version. You folks did the full-strength version of SB 152, which is good. So there's no limitations. They've self-inflicted some limitations there. But since then, Centennial's been doing amazing things. We could go through of the 100 cities that have passed the SB 152. There's tons and tons of things happening out there. What I thought I'd do maybe is just show a front-page story from the Colorado Springs Gazette, where they're talking about Colorado Springs lands the top 10 ranking from the Milken Institute. But more importantly, there's the mayor of Colorado Springs, you may know, John Suthers, was Attorney General for a while, but there was a ribbon cutting not too long ago where a company called Underline, actually October of last year, Underline came to town, Colorado Springs, and now there are not three competing, there are four competing overbuilding companies, all duking it out competitively driving hopefully prices down, and competition is galore. The local newspaper just in September calls it a gold rush of fiber optics, telecommunications going on, and the local ABC affiliate talks about fiber explodes, not physically, but figuratively. Fiber is exploding in Colorado Springs with 4 different competing companies. Curiously, Ting, you may know, is the second of the 4 to expand there, and Ting actually had their roots over in Centennial, and we've got a slide here that talks about that. Mark Gatto, you may know that name from your other circles, was a council member in Centennial and then went to run the Ting operation some time ago. So it's a small world. Anyway, that's kind of what's going on. It's a gold rush, and fiber is exploding across Colorado Springs. Ken, you want to talk about what is broadband?
Sure. So the FCC established the definition of broadband quite a while ago, and it's really outdated today, but it's 25 megabits download speed and 3 megabits upload speed. So if that's what you have, then you have broadband. If that's not what you have, it's short of that, then you don't have broadband. We'll talk more about that as we go along. With recent things coming out of funding acts coming out of the federal government, this definition has changed somewhat. So with the Infrastructure Jobs Act, they redefined this. The new minimum is 100 down and 20 up. So that's with recent legislation.
I might also just point out that to put that in perspective, the telecommunications people talk about megabits, and that's different than a megabyte. You may be acquainted with a gigabyte or a megabyte. That's not what telecom people talk about. There's 8 bits in a byte, and so basically, if you can download a 3 megabyte attachment, a song, a PDF file, a 3 megabyte is about a 25 megabit file. Think of it that way. So if you can download a 3 megabyte file in a second, as Ken said, you've got broadband. That's the simple, oversimplified definition. 3 megabytes per second is broadband. Short of that, and you probably don't have these cell phones, by the way. If you're on a 4G or LTE network, you probably don't have, you have internet, you don't have broadband, and that's a technical definition the FCC uses. What really matters in broadband, I put together a list of 5 things I think really matter a lot. I put latency, excuse me, as the top of the list of 5. I deliberately put speed at the bottom there. Latency, though, is how quickly your mouse reacts. Think of it that way. Or if you're talking to grandma on your cell phone, "Hi, grandma," and then you hear this kind of lag, that's latency. And with a fiber optic connection, you have almost no latency, to the point where you can do brain surgery from Houston through a fiber optic connection if you have low enough latency. It's that good. It's that amazing. Speed. Curiously, Comcast and a lot of the cable providers will talk about, they can give you a gigabit, that's 1,000 megabit speed through your coax cable, and we'll talk more about that
Before we go on,
Yep.
it's when we start talking about 5G, latency, capacity, and speed are what we really want to focus on when we start talking about 5G. The 5G standard has some very specific numbers associated with latency, capacity, and speed. So when we get there, we'll focus more on those 3.
So I do have a prop, if I may.
Real quick, can I ask a question? So do a majority of Coloradans not have broadband then?
Depends how you ask the question. Depends of whom you ask the question. The Colorado Broadband Office will tell you yes, and that's kind of correct. But if you ask your question the way the FCC does it, which is by census tract, you'll get a yes answer. If you ask people by population, grandma in Durango, do you have broadband? You'll probably get a no.
Okay.
So it's a complicated answer. In fact, a massive fight nationally is brewing right now over that very question. How do you measure who has it? Ken, while you're doing that, so I'll just pass out. Please, this is a fiber optic cable. It has glass. This is 96 glass strands. Please don't touch the end of it because you get a glass strand in your finger, and it's very difficult to do that. So this is fiber optic cable, 96 strands. And this is...
Okay. And just to clarify, the Colorado Broadband Office is part of the Governor's Office of Information Technology, so it's a state office, and a lot of the broadband funding from the federal government comes through the CBO. That's what they're called. All right, so how is broadband delivered? So we have multiple different channels, you can think of it that way, of delivering broadband. Wirelessly, there's satellite, there's cellular, which is both 4G, LTE, and 5G. We'll talk more about those here in a moment. And then there's wire line, so that's a fixed line. Most of you might be familiar with DSL. It's delivered over your copper telephone line. Coax cable, that's usually through Comcast. and then fiber optics, and we'll be talking much more about fiber optics as we go along.
So the sense we have from Chris and from Jay is that you're most concerned about cellular service or wireless service. And we kind of wanted to give you a little background first about the technology and how it's delivered before we jump too much into the wireless service. So much as Ken pointed out, there's 6 different ways really of delivering internet, whether it's broadband or not, internet to you. The cellular system out there really is now the 3G system. The 2G's gone, 3G's
gone.
3G's gone. It no longer exists.
That's right.
And so you either have 4G and LTE. I hate the acronym. LTE is
Long-term evolutionary.
it's a geeky term. It comes from somebody in the telecom world. Long-term evolutionary is LTE, but it's really just a 4G on steroids. And we'll talk a lot tonight about 5G and what some of the solutions and problems that we think are. Macro tower, you've all seen these. A good rule of thumb is a big tall one is maybe $1 million. Right now, your phone is most likely, I was astonished, I've got actually a brand new T-Mobile phone. I finally upgraded after 5 years. I had 1 bar service coming over on T-Mobile. I get it. You call this service, but I've got 1 bar of LTE service. Probably coming from a macro tower, most likely 2 to 3 miles away from wherever you are right now. There's a 2 to 3 mile away tower probably, and you're not getting broadband through it. You're probably getting about 20 megabits, right?
That's right. That's right. 4G tops out at about 20 megabits, so it is not true broadband.
On your 4G phone. If you have a 5G phone, we'll talk about speeds here in a moment. The important thing to remember, though, about 5G, when 5G comes in, these towers get to stay. The 5G transmitters will just augment them when 5G comes in. Ken, this is a brand new graphic he just prepared for you tonight.
Yeah, so this is just you can think of it as a line drawing of what a cellular network looks like. So off on the left, probably your right, is the 4G network that's in place today with the big macro cell. That's what we call those tall towers. And then off on the left, my right, your left, is the small cell network. The small cells require a whole lot more of the radio towers than the macro cell, and we'll talk more about that here in a moment and why that is. And then, as you can notice, all of that is interconnected via fiber. So we call that the backhaul from the tower to the cellular provider's core network. And then they have a separate connection fiber-wise to the internet. That's typically how they're set up.
So this is probably my second favorite slide of the presentation here. This is right out of the Washington Post. It's a year-ish, I guess 2 years ago now or so. So the numbers, I'm sure, have improved a bit. My favorite one, to look closely at T-Mobile. So I've got, as I said, I've got a T-Mobile phone. I actually like T-Mobile. The T-Mobile 4G speed is just under 22, here we go, megabits. So 4G T-Mobile is 22 megabits. 5G T-Mobile comes in at a little over 24 megabits. So you've gone from 22-ish to 24, 25 megabits, which I don't know is a massive jump in speed going from 4G to 5G. That's T-Mobile, to be fair. AT&T, you can see the numbers there. Wow, you go from 43 to 46. Not a huge increase in speed. Verizon, in my book, though, gets kind of 5 stars, taking it from, they were faster to begin with, just with the technology and the equipment they have out there, going from 47 to about 165. So when you see a lot of the 5G hype on TV, be careful, be cautious. It's not quite what you think it might be. It's not this massive increase, although it can be, and that's what we'll talk about here in a moment. But right now, these are the 5G versus 4G speeds. The Washington Post calls it the lie.
Dave, can I ask a quick question? How come does Verizon have proprietary use of this technology? Is that why? I mean, why doesn't AT&T and T-Mobile have the same 165 gigabyte millimeter small set? What are we measuring?
There's 3 different, you can think of them as frequency spectrums in the 5G arena. T-Mobile has chosen to go with the lower spectrum, which is pretty much the same frequency spectrum as 4G. So they're strapping all of their 5G stuff to those macro cells. And they go the same distance as 4G when you do that, but you don't get the speed that you get at the higher frequencies. So AT&T went with the mid-spectrum, and Verizon went with the high spectrum. We call it millimeter wave. That's what Verizon did. So they get faster speeds, much more capacity, a lot lower latency, as we talked about previously on that slide, but they all have to be a lot closer together because of the higher frequency.
I made a slide about that too.
And does the, can you go back one slide, sorry? Sure. Whoever's driving here. Does the 155, does that equate to cell coverage as well? I mean, I know it works if I'm downloading something to my phone. It's faster if I'm on Verizon than it would be on T-Mobile or AT&T if I'm running on 5G. Does that same thing hold true for making a phone call? Is it going to be a better reception for a phone
Yes.
call? Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Yeah, on the phone call, the latency, which is I'll call it hello, grandma, there's almost no time. It's like a regular conversation you're having when you have low latency and you've got the high speed. It's a much better connection than the 4G. You've got that pause between you, the latency.
Okay.
Ken, you want to talk about small cells? So much of this equipment, though, is based on today the macro cells. A lot of where we're going, though, the 5G stuff, will take small cells. Talk about that.
Yeah. So small cells are much smaller than the large macro cells that you see. The macro cells are typically 50 feet or higher, usually in a 100-foot range in height. Small cells are 50 feet or less. We typically see them between the 25 and 35-foot height. And they also have to be a lot closer together because of the 5G piece that we were just talking about, for example, with Verizon. Typically, we have to put them about the same distance as a street light. So about 300 to 600 feet apart is the most they can be apart in order for the signal to be continuous between the different cell phone towers. In September of 2018, I'll talk a little legal talk here. In September of 2018, the FCC released what they call the small cell order. And you may be familiar with this because it preempted a lot of your control over your right-of-ways. What the FCC small cell order said was that any of the providers can come into your right-of-way and install these things, and you can't say no. What you can do, though, and I think you've done this already, is establish aesthetic guidelines so you can determine what they look like. You can't say no, but you can determine what they look like. You can even go as far as to say, what are your preferred locations for each of these devices?
Real quick before you go on from that slide, if I could just ask a question, and you may be getting to this later, and if you are, just say we'll get to it later. But so now that we have to have these cells, these small cell sites so much closer to each other, the network of the data connection between those is critical.
Yes.
Which is where the fiber part of the backbone conversation comes into play, correct?
Yes.
And so, generally speaking, are providers install, how much do these cost per, you said $1 million for the macro towers.
These are about 20 to 30K.
So a lot less, but you got to have a lot more of them.
Yes.
Are they willing to put them in without fiber?
Only if they're going to put 4G on them. And a lot of the ones that you see out there today are 4G. And 4G, they can interconnect those wirelessly.
I see.
But when you go to 5G, and again, because of the 5G standard regarding capacity, latency, and speed, you have to interconnect them with fiber.
Thank you.
So I'll get a little geeky here for a moment. There's a brand new technology. I'm sure no one's heard of this thing, but in your cell phone, there's 5 different things you can talk wirelessly. You have Bluetooth. You've got a Wi-Fi in your cell phone right now. You've got 4G and 5G, probably, possibly, and you also have, didn't even know this, CBRS. About 3 years ago, the FCC came out and said quietly, anyone with a phone 3 years ago or newer, and I just got a brand new T-Mobile phone, has Wi-Fi chip, Bluetooth chip, 4G, 5G, and has a CBRS chip in it. What's CBRS? Community or Citizens Broadband Radio Service. Remember the old CB radio? This is not that. It's CB, Citizens Broadband, not Citizens Band, Citizens Broadband Radio Service. Basically, it allows Cherry Hills Village to create your own 5G network. And we'll talk about how I think that's way cool, and what the equipment will do is it'll pop between a 4G network, as your phone may do now, to 5G, and it'll pop to a CBRS tower if you have one, if there is one. It senses which one is the best for the phone, and by FCC rules, it's seamless. It actually integrates amazingly well. And we'll talk about a ski area who can remain nameless where we're doing exactly this for right now. So, speaking of which, okay, so I promised I wouldn't name the ski area. You can probably tell which one this is if you're a skier at all. We're doing some work in this nameless ski area at the moment, where the results, we just wrapped up a few, I guess back in August for them, said, look, if you want to build fiber optic cable from ski lift tower to ski lift tower, and you put up a tower at key locations, the red blotches, by the way, on the left there, are where the service is actually get 5 bars today. Think of it, 5 bars down to 1 bar. A lot of the mountain has no bars of service whatsoever. But the essence of it here is that here's an agency, and they're working closely with 2 local governments very nearby them. But here's a local entity that says, you know, we've had enough of bad cell phone service. In this case, it's $7 million-ish to put in all the equipment, to put in all the towers, to put in all the fiber optic cable, $7 million, and they will blast the area with amazing, it'll be gigabit speed, not the AT&T, or the Verizon is 150, this will be 1,000 megabit true 5G service over the entire ski area. They asked us, can we please design for them the words they used to me, a world-class system. And what you see here is going to be a world-class system. It's 5G, but it's based not on necessarily the T-Mobile, AT&T, Verizon, although they can jump on the towers. It's based on the CBRS chips in your phone that you probably didn't even know you had. Does this make sense a little bit? Does this help? Where are we going here? Can you talk about the layer cake?
Sure. So there are a variety of different layers. Oh, sorry. Yes.
There we go. Who's paying for the system? The ski resort?
Yes.
And how are they intending to monetize it? Is it just their lift ticket sales and you get the service as well as the slope, or?
So incredibly, and I'm not at full liberty to share the financial background, but there's a very comfortable ROI because all the fiber infrastructure they're paying for up front, all the fiber infrastructure, all the tower infrastructure, and the communications network it takes to run this stuff is all very valuable. And there are 3 companies who've quietly said, if you build it, we will come. That's a line from a movie and cliche, I know, but you build it and we will come because the money's there. They're putting the front-end capital in to do it. But then the easy part, the O&M piece, operations maintenance.
Okay, so the ski resort puts the money in for the infrastructure, and the cell providers say, gee, that's great, we'd like to use it.
Yep.
Do they pay a rent
They
to
do,
the
exactly.
ski resort?
Yeah, and that's how they monetize it. So they'll rent the pole, and it'll be what they call plug and play. Plug in the equipment, and they can light up. AT&T will have AT&T 5G gigabit service there, but there'll also be CBRS.
Enough to offset the $7 million initial investment?
Exactly, yeah. And as I said, the very comfortable ROI. This is budget season for them too, so they're taking this actually to their board of directors to hopefully green light this deployment that we've outlined for them.
So real quick, because I see we're
Good question.
getting run on time here. Again, multiple layers, and we've talked about some of these already, CBRS, 4G LTE. We talked about the small cells, low, medium, and the millimeter wave stuff, satellite. We won't touch much on DAS. It's distributed antenna system, but we won't get into that. And then Wi-Fi, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, and then, of course, fiber. Fiber is really the infrastructure behind most of these. Okay.
The next picture takes me back to when we first met, and I was here not too many years ago. On the far right there is a picture I took of Dry Creek Road and Holly. It's a traffic signal there, and we worked a deal with Verizon. They put an $85,000 traffic signal mast, the vertical piece, and mast arm traffic signal. There was what they call a span wire traffic signal before that. But within the mast is contained a single Verizon transmitter. It's Verizon 4G. They paid the money, and we, the City of Centennial, had, you'll see here a slide coming right up, talking about a great fiber infrastructure that Centennial has built, largely with Dr. Cog money, putting it in, interconnecting all the traffic signals. So it costs Centennial almost nothing, and they got a free traffic signal, and they've got a pretty good location. Again, this is Dry Creek and Holly. The middle picture there is just simply it's a downtown Denver picture showing what we think you should not do. There's two things wrong with that. I think it's the street light to the left, street light to the right, so there's just cluttering, it's visual clutter in downtown Denver. And then if you look up at the, fifth or sixth floor condo balcony, there may be an RF or radio frequency or radiation concern we have. A better example of radiation, though, is on the far left there. That's a picture of a third floor balcony. If grandma, the story I've heard, I don't know that I believe it, grandma walks out with a cold cup of coffee, and the frequency, the radiation coming off that 4G panel is kitchen microwave frequency. And supposedly cold cup of coffee becomes warm cup of coffee. It's not my jurisdiction. They didn't ask me. And I don't know that I believe it, other than the fact that there's a 4G panel just inches away from the third floor balcony. That's a bad example, if that makes sense.
Popular community in the Southwest we won't go into. So these are some examples of how you can camouflage some of these cellular towers. So the picture up in the upper left-hand corner with the arrow pointing, that's in a cupola. That is at the Colorado Mills area.
Well, actually, it's a Best Buy.
It's a Best Buy. Oh, that's right, South Glen.
University.
This one's at South Glen, sorry. So that's just a cupola in a Best Buy store that they put a lot of the radio equipment in. This is what we call a neutral host site. So in other words, Best Buy owns the site. They put fiber and power in there for the cellular providers, and the cellular providers just come in and lease the space and put their antennas and so forth in it.
The picture on the far right there, I just took 3 weeks ago, I gave a very similar presentation at the Los Angeles Convention Center. Just walking out there, and that's one of the few examples I've ever seen with my own eyes of two cellular providers on one tower. The LA Convention Center has made it so tough to put a new tower in there that you get two competitors on the same pole. There's a street light, and then there's a panel above, kind of, and those little blobby things down below. The point there is, though, is that you can't force them, but you can make it kind of so difficult that they'll want to work together, and they hate that because they're competitors, but they'll do it. This is a picture from my neighborhood where it's not my house, but just this, I can't call garbage publicly, but this telecommunications equipment on the street level, which drives this particular neighbor nuts, because at 3 o'clock in the morning somebody loses internet, and you got a Comcast truck, you got a CenturyLink truck with the flashy lights digging in one of these panels there. So I guess the point there is, to the extent you can, try to conceal them. And then here again is Dry Creek and Holly, picture I took there. It's not the best of concealed, but it's behind that fence, and all that equipment stuff is concealed. And there's also rules about either you put it underground, flush with the ground, or you conceal it and you make it quiet if you can. But that's aesthetics there. And there's just a picture of an underground vault. We are on slide 19 now of about 28, Chris, if that's okay, time-wise. Moving along. Just talking briefly about streetlights. We've done some work. We did with Greenwood Village. We did their background work. They have completely municipalized 1,000 streetlights, not traffic signals, 1,000 streetlights in Greenwood Village. They now own them all. They bought them all out. There's an NDA in place, so they can't tell you what it is. You can kind of run the numbers backwards. Loosely, it's less than $1,000 per streetlight is what XL is selling them for. Curiously, if you run the math forward, the city's being charged loosely about $20 per streetlight per month. So $20 per month times 12 is about $240 per streetlight per year. And curiously, the FCC says you can charge rent if you own the streetlight. A city can charge rent up to what they call a safe harbor rate of $270. So not only is Greenwood Village not paying XL $240 per year per streetlight, they're able to charge $270 per year and generate some cash from each of the streetlights. And we'll talk about streetlights and distances here. But I just wanted to point out that's what we did for Greenwood Village. They're pretty happy with it right now. And their city manager, their Chris, told me straight up that they're saving $90,000 a year in cash out of the budget. They're no longer having to pay XL. It's only been I think it's been 3 years now since they've done that.
We have 8.
Oh, gee, okay.
Yeah, we have 8
Never mind.
streetlights.
Okay, well, that's a quick discussion there. Ken, densification.
So as you can tell, when we start talking about how close these things have to be together, and we have currently 3 providers, by the way, soon 4, Dish Network is going to get into the cellular business. you'll need 3 towers, 1 tower per provider, unless you force them to co-locate on the same tower. So that's what we're demonstrating here. This is actually a neighborhood in Thornton. We did a lot of work for Thornton around small cell 5G stuff as well. So every one of the green dots is maybe Verizon. Every one of the red ones is AT&T, and then the other color is yellow is T-Mobile. So this is what it could potentially look like if they build out an entire 5G millimeter wave, the Verizon flavor network. You'll need 3 towers, and they'll have to be 300 to 600 feet apart from each other.
These next 3 slides are probably my favorite 3 slides of the whole presentation, so kind of watch carefully. I don't know if you can you kind of see there's a little street grid on yours? The projector doesn't show that well, I guess, here, but okay, good. So the point there is that this is a Connecticut city. These aren't our graphics, but we've credited the creators there. But a typical square mile of a typical city requires about 7 macro cells per square mile for 1 square mile worth of city. How many square miles, Chris, is? 5.5. Okay, so park that number for a second. So 7 cell towers per square mile. The first of the 3 waves, as Ken said, there's kind of 3 frequencies, low, medium, high. The first of 3 waves goes from 7 per square mile to 27 in the first wave. Second wave takes it from 7 to 56. And again, as Ken said, to go to millimeter wave, which is the gigabit, the 1,000 megabit service that we've all kind of been promised with 5G. And if you have a 5G phone, your phone is capable of 1,000 megabits. It's capable of a gigabit. To get to gigabit will require 109 transmitters per square mile. You've got 5 square miles, 5 times 100-ish is going to be 500 transmitters to fully serve Cherry Hills Village with this frequency at gigabit service. And if it's kind of a foot stomper, that's kind of maybe an eye-opener for some people. Again, the density here is what a typical city has, more than 2 transmitters per street light, if you had street lights, which you don't. Here's a picture, a screenshot that one of, this is when I was with Centennial. This is a map of Centennial. And if you look closely, Cherry Hills Village is in the upper left corner there a little bit. But what we did there was, when I was in Centennial, we went to the mayor, city council, and we asked them to give us some new rules. So every time a conduit, one of those orange pipes, is going in the ground, that the permit requester would come to the city hall, you take out a permit to put the pipe in the ground, and we, Centennial, would require them to put in a public conduit. It's just orange plastic pipe. It's not fancy. The cost of that pipe, by the way, is about $1 to buy it and about $1 to put it in the ground. So $2 is what we were paying them per linear foot, 5,000 feet mile, $10,000 per mile of street. And over a 4-year period, real life, this is kind of where Mark Gatto started saying, wow, that's a pretty cool network. 60 miles of fiber optic, not fiber optic cable, 60 miles of orange pipe is all it was. The beauty of it, though, was we went to Dr. Cog and says, hey, we don't want to use city money. Can we at least match it with some Dr. Cog money? So blended, Dr. Cog and city money was $600,000 at $2 a foot. And the value of that to Ting or companies like that is at least 10 million, maybe 20 million. So we put 600K in. Half that was Dr. Cog money, 300K a city, 300K Dr. Cog, and they got a $20 million investment sitting in the ground. It's just orange pipe. So what do you do with the orange pipe? This is a picture I took on Arapahoe Road, right by the Shane Company, and they've changed it now to an electronic billboard. But the point is, Ting came in and says, well, you guys got 60 miles of conduit, and Centennial did put some money into a fiber optic backbone. So Ting is now leasing, I think, 24 strands is all it takes. That was 96. So it's 24 strands out of a 96 cable is all it takes to run Ting gigabit service to 100,000 people, residents of Centennial, on a backbone that was built with largely Dr. Cog money over 4 years as pipe was going in the ground. Just kind of a strategic change. The city council approved it. We tried it with a city manager regulation. That didn't work well. We went to a city council resolution. That worked a little bit better, but we learned with the telecoms, we had to go to a city council ordinance. So it was kind of the third time as a charm, but we figured that out, city council ordinance, and they're now required to do that.
Were you able to get that Dr. Cog money because you were doing traffic signals?
Exactly. Yep,
Okay.
yep.
We have 0.
And David, have you scaled that operation down before? Have you seen it scaled down? You talk about Centennial doing it for 100,000 residents. We have just over 6,000 residents here. Is it economically feasible to do it for such a small footprint?
Short answer is yes. The question's going to be, and in fact, we're doing that right now in Woodland Park. There are 6,000 residents in Woodland Park. I think we just met with their council 2 weeks ago or so. And I forget what the number is. You're doing the technical work. It's a couple $1 million, $2 million, $3 million, I think.
Yeah. So we just wrapped up a telecommunications master plan project for Woodland Park. The city council there decided to go all underground, which is not the cheapest. I'll just share that with you up front. It's about $1.8 million to do, and it's just a ring. It's a middle mile ring to interconnect all of the city facilities.
Wait,
That's fiber conduit and all the construction.
1.8 per mile?
No, 1.8 total for the entire project.
And how many miles is, how big is that, how big is that geographic area?
Jeez. I don't remember that number, I'm sorry.
Roughly the same?
Yeah.
A couple squares,
Yeah.
4 or 5 square miles. It's like you guys,
Yeah.
about the same density you guys have.
So what did that get? What did that get Woodland Park? It got them the backbone fiber.
Just like that.
Conduit and the fiber. Actually, it's 2 conduits. They're putting in double conduits, so they have a spare conduit that they can lease out for providers to use. But yeah, and it's 96 strands of fiber, and it's really to interconnect all of their facilities. They even have remote reservoirs. You know, they have a fresh water system.
Are they doing this with the CBRE, what it's called,
CBRS.
CBRS? Is that, are they doing their own system, or are they
No.
they leasing out to the cell phone?
They're not that far into it yet. They're just,
Yeah.
So all they want right now really is they just want a backbone. They says, look, the
Okay.
the fiber backbone is huge. Let's focus on that first, and then we'll figure out who connects what equipment and who uses it and how we do that. Right now, let's just build the backbone.
Right.
Okay.
In fact, curiously, if I can add one more comment about Woodland Park, we came in, our recommendation was to build a hybrid system, part of it aerial on the telephone poles, and part of it underground, if it made more sense to go underground or aerial. With the forest fire danger, and just by coincidence, I was asking, we were at a conference last week, and Alex Arenello, he's the Town of Superior Public Works Director. He's Jay's counterpart, sort of, in Superior. Of course, they had the Marshall Fire 8, 9, 10 months ago. And I asked Alex on Tuesday of last week, Alex, tell me, post-fire, was the fiber optic cable damaged? He says, Dave, he says, everything above the ground in Superior was burnt, right, burnt to a crisp, but 100% of the fiber was intact. And the point there, I guess, is that with the Woodland Park people learning that, they decided, look, don't put anything on telephone poles. Sadly, if there's a big fire, you're going to lose telecommunications. Nothing's more important to the public safety people than telecom, frankly. And so they said, put everything underground, and we will do our best in the name of resiliency to have everything fireproofed to the best extent we can. So if a Superior fire happens here at Woodland Park, they're underground. Mm-hmm. It's twice as expensive, but I think it's well worth it.
Sure. Shifting gears, the other decision that the Woodland City Park Council made was what type of broadband model did they want to go with. So I can't take credit for this slide. This is actually from a white paper, a 2020 white paper about how municipalities can provide broadband to their unserved or underserved areas. Really great white paper. And this is a really great chart because it outlines the 5 general broadband models for municipalities to consider. And as you can see, broadband model 5 is where you guys are at today. Everything is provided by the private sector. No involvement really from the city. And that's actually where Woodland Park is at too, just so that you know. On the other end of that scale, broadband model 1 is what Longmont did. So Longmont, through their electric utility, offers broadband services to all of their citizens and all of their businesses. And it's really cheap, about $50 per gig per month. So that's really great service. I don't know if that's where you guys want to head, where you roll out an independent business, or I guess it's a government business, to provide internet services. Most of the communities that we've worked with have chosen either 2, 3, or 4. Woodland Park chose 3. So what Woodland Park is going to do is build the infrastructure. So they're going to put the fiber and the conduit in the ground. And then they're going to go after private sector partners to operate it and maintain it, to offer services over it.
Much like that ski area that needs to remain nameless. It's just among us. The next slide here, and I think we've got 5 more slides, if that's okay, Chris, time-wise?
Yes. Are one of these going to talk about ARPA funding?
To some extent, yes.
Maybe.
Yes, maybe we can. Yes,
Yes.
absolutely.
Absolutely.
The point of this slide here, real quickly here, is that City of Aspen, they're one of our clients also, they wanted to take kind of a defensive posture to 5G. They really don't want it. There's radiation concerns. We won't go there tonight. We have a whole hour presentation. We talk about radiation and 5G. But between the radiation concerns and the historic concerns in downtown Aspen, they says, look, what we're going to do, though, is lay out a fiber backbone, and then we'll do these, like the Best Buy stores, plug and play. So you can't say no. And Verizon, if Verizon wants to go in and go right in front of the Jerome Hotel in downtown Aspen, they can. But to the extent they can, look, let's make it easy for them. If you want to go here, it's easy, plug and play. The fiber's there, the power's there, it's a straight light, light it up on Thursday and you're good to go. If you insist on going across the street, buckle up, it's going to be a year's worth of historical blah, blah, blah stuff. You can do it there because we can't say no. But they're doing this plug and play and neutral hosting, which I think will serve Aspen well. So they're on the defensive side. The other extreme, I just put this little green bumper sticker up there talking about a city that we've working with now called Elk Grove Village. If you're flying into Chicago O'Hare Airport, and you see actually the runways there, the sea of warehouses on your final approach to Chicago O'Hare, that's Elk Grove Village. They're one of our clients, and I just put a little bumper sticker there saying that they're taking control of their own 5G destiny. They want to be the first gigabit 5G city in Illinois. And they've asked us to lay out how do we do this, what do we do, and what we're doing there is really doing a process. Ken's helped put together the paperwork to attract in the private sector, and the city is somewhere like a Centennial they're putting in the backbone, and then they've asked us to help attract the private sector, let them put the money in. But again, if you upfront the backbone, then you build it and they will come. That's kind of what we're seeing.
It was all about economic development for those folks. So that's what we really did. We wrote a really in-depth white paper about how 5G can impact economic development. And then we also wrote all of their ordinances and their aesthetic design guidelines.
We have 2 slides left and then just a wrap-up slide. But the point of this slide here is that if we leave nothing else behind, really the expensive part, the important part, is the fiber backbone. And the extent to which you'd like to put it underground or overhead, you can decide that as a policy matter the council can wrestle with. But really the important foot stomper part is if you get the fiber, is this the orange pipe I passed around? This is not the fiber itself. So as I mentioned, it's $1 a foot for the pipe, and that piece of fiber we passed around, that's $1 worth. 96 strands, about a penny per strand foot. So you're looking at $1 worth of fiber and $1 worth of pipe. That stuff's really cheap. The expensive part's digging the hole to get it in the ground. And so if you can lay the infrastructure out in advance, that's the build it and they will come. The last thing we just talked about briefly is we won't do a deep dive into this thing here. There are concerns with electromagnetic radiation. You do have some topography issues here, obviously in Cherry Hills Village. And we would suggest that whatever you do it mindfully, so you don't so you take the highest level of concern for radiation coming off these towers, because that is a serious safety concern. So this is our last slide, just best practices, elements of a plan. Ken, you want to kind of walk through what we're thinking of, maybe your next step?
Sure. So what we really, big picture wise, this is all about defining the problem. I mean, that's where you really need to start. I don't know if you have a handle on what the problem is, but this is an opportunity for you to really zero in on what is the problem before you go about trying to solve something. So we need to look at what you already have in place here, cellular service-wise, both macro cell and small cell-wise. And then we need to look at the existing fiber infrastructure. And that may involve the private sector, the Comcast, the CenturyLink Lumens now of the world. So there may need to be, from a legal standpoint, some NDA work in order to get some of that information from those folks. And then you need to take a look at your current market. Who's offering what services? What are their speeds? Where are they available? How much do they cost? Those types of things. And then do a deep dive into your existing policies and standards. We talk about making Cherry Hills Village fiber friendly. So that's why you want to really kind of dig into what are your policies and standards today. And if you have any, we call them MLAs or master lease agreements in place, a good review of those as well, because that'll determine your future direction. And then really do a deep dive into what we just showed you as far as municipal broadband models, and try to figure out where you guys want to head. What is your vision? Which of those models do you like? Okay. And then the final step in all of that is really to develop some strategic direction, some next steps. All of that makes sense?
So let me just ask a quick follow-up question. It's been suggested by some that perhaps a nice way to leverage additional funding for a potential broadband backbone might be through ARPA funding. I think if you guys could talk about what you're aware of as far as eligibility and who's eligible for using ARPA funds and who's not, what it can be used for.
And ARPA funds is just one of the funding instruments out there, so we can talk about all of them. There's some state funds, a lot of federal funds right now, mainly because of the pandemic, of course, that really raised the concern about broadband access nationwide. So in many of the federal bills, going all the way back to the CARES Act, which came out in, 2020, I think, there's money still left in there for broadband. It's called the Capital Projects Fund. There's about $160 million from that fund available in the state of Colorado through the Colorado Broadband Office that we talked about earlier. They just rolled out the grant application process for that this month. Yes, today, I think. So anyway, those funds will be available. Then there are some funds in ARPA, as you mentioned. There are funds in ARPA for doing studies like what you're asking about here. And then there are funds actually to build and construct broadband facilities as well. And I think you can apply directly.
Well, we got an allocation.
Okay.
So compared to the infrastructure bill or the leftover CARES money, we would have to compete for all those. We have an allocation from ARPA.
Yes.
That would be.
That's the big advantage of ARPA.
And so I know that there's some language in ARPA that talks about eligibility and, who.
Underserved and unserved and underserved.
Can you talk about that briefly?
Sure. So underserved is now that 325 thing that we were just talking about. So 3 megabits up and 25 megabits down. That's now considered unserved, all right? Underserved is now considered 100 megabits down and 20 megabits up. So they redefined broadband with those things. And I suspect that most of Cherry Hills Village might fit into that underserved area now.
I would agree.
Yeah, so that certainly improves your eligibility.
How can we get that information from the carriers? I mean, like what? Okay, right.
Yeah,
right,
we have
okay.
included, part of the study will be getting that information.
Okay.
That's one of the things.
I mean, you really almost have to
List
talk
was
to every
assessing
person and
funding.
see what they're getting.
It would be, that we would set a set number of people in each part of the city to get a good overall look at what is going on everywhere.
Yeah, there are a couple of things that we could add to this list, one of which is doing an analysis of funding resources. And then the other one that we didn't put on here that we have done before is actually doing a public survey. So a survey of the public and the business community to get a feel for where are they at currently as far as broadband services and what are their needs.
Hey, back of the envelope, you talked about 500 transmitters would do it for the city. Back of the envelope, what's that cost?
If you want to build a fiber infrastructure piece,
Fiber backbone, couple million, 2 million-ish?
yeah, I would say probably the same ballpark figure that we gave Woodland Park.
$2 million for
Yeah.
the fiber backbone. And then depending if you want fancy pants poles or you want just wooden poles, 10 to 20,000 per pole.
Yep.
Times 500. What's that number? I don't know. Maybe million-ish for that? 3 million, 4 million tops have a gigabit. What we're doing in Elk Grove Village, the Chicago Hair City, that's a gigabit level. Everybody gets 5G gigabit service, phenomenal. And you can do it with CBRS. You don't have to wait for Verizon to come in. Oh, we'll be there in August of next year. No, you got CBRS this August. Light it up gigabit. It's yours. You own it. And then you can lease it like the ski company's doing.
Didn't you say a moment ago, oh,
Well, the $20,000 seems sort of phenomenally low. I mean, does that include the radios, the transmitters, the switch, all of that business as well? I mean, we just, we spent hundreds of thousands of dollars for one traffic light.
Well, I just know that, and then granted, this was pre-pandemic, when we had conversation with Verizon, they were saying between 20 and 30,000 to put in one of their poles.
so if we need, the math is if it's $25,000 or $30,000 per pole times 500 of them, that's 15 million, not 2 or 3 million.
I think a lot of it depends on what they have in place. Yeah. So if there's no power, if there's not a network, a system in place that connects it all with a strategic overall approach, like what a plan would contemplate, then I think, Jay, you got quotes of a lot more for a small cell.
Yeah, the cost to move the one pole when we did the undergrounding in the south was $150,000.
So again, that's in an unnetworked environment, but
But that's why we would need to do a study to get the exact numbers of what we're talking about. Because I think there's such a wide margin of costs and, depending on what's in and what's not. Power becomes a big issue too.
Yeah, and the 20 to 30,000, just to clarify, is just the equipment. I don't know what it costs to actually install it.
Yeah.
And a lot of those costs are labor associated.
So if you needed 500 and they cost 1,000 each, that'd be 500,000. If they cost
30,000, it's 15
10,000 each, that's, you're at, 5 million and then.
15 million.
Yeah,
for-
so it's,
Yeah, that's why when we were talking about $2 million, $1.8 million, $2 million, same cost as Woodland Park, I think there's a disconnect here, at least in my mind, about what are we getting for 2 to 3 million versus why am I coming up with 15 million for the same
Yeah, and to
package.
Jay's point exactly, that part of the study would identify that you wouldn't want to build necessarily right off, coming out the chute, 500 transmitters, though you could, and everybody would have phenomenal 5G service. I would say work with the providers, talk to all of them, what we're doing now. In El Paso County, we're doing a RFEI, a request for expression of interest. In other words, reaching out to the carriers, what are you guys doing? What's your service? What they'll probably tell you is the lower density cities, yours among them, the revenue's not there for them. They're not going to put in 500 towers, $15 million will never happen.
Well, that's why we have no cell coverage here now, right?
Exactly.
So what's going to attract them? If we put in the backbone infrastructure, that is the attractor? That's what attracted in Centennial?
Yep.
Typically, what you want to do as part of the study is find your preferred locations for each of these towers and then build those in as like pull boxes or something in your network design so that easy to access.
Pop the plug off, stick a pole in.
You got it.
Play.
You got it.
But the 2 million that you mentioned for Woodland Park, the 2 million is for that network. It has nothing to do with the towers.
Exactly.
That's right.
Because I think that's important as we talk about potential scope. And the study we're hoping to get that on the street this week. We just got the buy-off from legal. Hoping to get that on the street this week so we'll get that ball rolling. But, one of the primary sources of funds to be able to use for this, obviously our ARPA allotment, we don't have 4 million, 6 million. So what would be the biggest bang for the buck for that if the community and city council wanted to use ARPA funds for cell phone coverage? Well, that fiber backbone could theoretically be in the ballpark, right?
And that also goes back to those models that the different model screen. In the Woodland Park model, all they're doing is building the backbone. They're spending $2 million, and then they're going to rely on the private entities to do that $15 million piece.
To maybe show up to do it.
Maybe, and that's all part of this big discussion, right?
It seems to me that we would have to look beyond just the fiber ring, the backbone, and make sure that, because we have low density, and I'm not as sure that the towers cover a geography, 500 towers, 5 square miles. And if you get half the customers or a quarter of the customers in that geography compared to Woodland Park, it may not make financial sense for the carriers to sign up. So I think we'd need to cover that bridge, make sure that we have customers, if you will, to jump on that fiber backbone before we actually can make a good decision about the backbone itself.
Yeah, and I would argue that I think the study would help put parameters on that. Council might recall, spending taxpayer dollars, going beyond the ARPA funding or any other grant funding that we could possibly find. We have a planning and zoning commissioner in the audience tonight, who could talk a little bit about some of the survey work that we did regarding some of this stuff, and using taxpayer dollar for some of this, it wasn't sort of a slam dunk. So
Chris, I'm thinking just feasibility and like beyond just what it would cost. I think we got to take a look at, do we have a viable business here, or a viable proposition? Is anybody, we build it and nobody comes.
Yeah.
Another thing that we've done within that sort of a project study or a study is float out what's called a request for expressions of interest. And I think that's what you're really talking about. So we put together just a brief description of what the city wants to do, and then you go after some private sector partners potentially. So that's what the RFEI is all about.
Would a study include not only small cells and the idea about putting in a broadband system throughout the city using small cells? Would it also include, or at least examine or look at, a large cell format tower? I guess that's based on what we give you direction to study.
It definitely could.
Yeah.
I only bring it up. I know it's a hot potato could be a hot potato for anyone who lives close to one of them, but it might be the most bang for the buck. It's probably a throwaway as far as the infrastructure within a few years, because we're going to be getting it all from up in the sky, aren't we, at some point?
Probably not. The latency, just the laws of
Okay.
physics, speed of light. Satellites will be good if you're in the middle of Park County, but here you're sharing it with 3 million people in the Denver metro area.
Okay.
Satellites are never really going to be.
Correct me if I'm wrong,
large cells. Are you guys putting in the large format 100-foot towers anymore?
No, Ken actually does you do the review work for Aurora and Douglas County, for example, and have you done any large towers in the last couple of years?
Not large towers, but antennas attached to buildings. I mentioned earlier, Dish. That's what Dish is doing right now.
But
is
I'm just trying to
strapping
think,
a
is there a
lot
way to get the most bang for our buck? If we had an open field that was 20 acres in size, and we could throw up a 150-footer, 120-footer, whatever the largest reasonable tower size was, but it's going to get the most bang for our buck dollars-wise. It's going to broadcast a signal a couple miles in every direction, right?
But is that only
Bills
4G?
depending.
That's only 4G, yeah.
Understood, but people would have cell phone coverage. Right? People would have cell phone coverage with 4G versus.
Yeah, for phone calls. I think at some point.
You're right,
that-
and so
that
actually,
technology
I know
will
we
be
only have
gone.
2 minutes, Mayor, but when I asked staff to explore this a couple months ago and get going with this discussion with these guys, I wasn't really thinking about broadband. It's great to think about this, and I love this whole idea about putting in a big backbone and hooking up with private partnership and whatever. I was really focused on cell coverage. Is there a different alternative to this stuff that we're talking about to help our citizens' cell coverage than what we're talking about? Is there any other alternative than what we're talking about right now?
CBRS, we talked about that. CBRS can be 4G, LTE, or 5G. The weird part that we didn't mention about the 5G millimeter wave, that's the very ultra-fast gigabit speed. The 5G millimeter wave stuff will not penetrate low-E glass, which they don't tell you. So in other words, if there were a 5G tower right across the parking lot where the flagpole is here, you're not going to get a 5G signal through that glass if it's low-E glass. And so it's line of sight, but it's very easily obstructed. And so you'll probably always be stuck with a 4G signal. It's great for cell phone coverage.
Yeah.
But you're not going to get gigabit speed
But-
on your cover on your cell phone.
All right.
And is there any way to know what the rough cost of that would be to do that system? Or it's still the same thing because we would need to put in.
They still need the fiber.
We still need to put in the fiber, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
All right, we do
Wow,
need-
that's a
we-
lot to comprehend. in an
Yeah,
hour.
Yeah, it's a lot. Go ahead, Jay.
I want to answer Counselor Sheldon. The first part of our RFP is a visioning process. So we can lay out and visioning with city council and with
Good.
residents to say, where do we want to go? And that will drive then what we study and how we study it. So that visioning is the big part as to what's the city's vision, and then study how do we get there.
Is that part of the surveying that we talked about possibly
Yes,
doing?
the surveying is
Great.
also within the RFP, so.
Great.
Great. All right, we do need to wrap it up. It is, I have
Thanks, guys.
I have 6:30. Does anyone wish to take a break before we move into the regular session? Are we ready to go? Thank you very much, gentlemen. Appreciate your presentation. It was very, very helpful.
Thank you, we appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, I have 6:30. We'll move right into the regular session of the Cherry Hills Village City Council. It's Tuesday, November 1st. We'll call it to order. Roll call of members, please.
Councilor Safavi,
Here.
Councilor Wheel,
Happy to be here.
Mayor Pro Tem Brown,
Here.
Councilor Gallagher,
Here.
Councilor Sheldon,
Here.
and Councilor Bloom is absent.
If we could all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance, please. Okay, next, audience participation. If I could have someone grab the sheet. Chris? Okay. Laura Chrisman, you're up about budget.
Laura Chrisman, 18 Cherry Lane. I'm actually going to talk about two things. I want to talk first about the crier. Better? Okay. When Mayor Tisdale was the mayor, he created this mayoral musings thing in the crier. And sometimes he wrote a lot, sometimes he wrote a little. And generally, he used it as a major booster, talking about how great the village was, which is pretty cool. Anyway, then I come in. I am told unequivocally 500 words, but if you have to go over, not more than half a page. And it was fine. I used it for mostly light-hearted stuff. That is not where we are today. It is used as a bully pulpit. It has been used for campaigning. And it affords no other opportunity for anybody on council to talk to their own constituents. And I just think that a balance is necessary. So I think it needs to be limited, because at least Jessica told me that a whole page is very expensive. But I think it should be limited to half a page, and I think it should rotate through each council member, including the mayor. So if we have a council member who has, for example, a concern about cell towers or cell coverage, they could use, if they chose, an opportunity to say this is something that they've heard from their community, and that there's going to be a study session or whatever. And I do think it makes a difference when that council person can address issues that they have and it not just be the mayor. I do think that all I'm asking is a fair balance for everyone. And I think I would like to see that, and clearly it's not my decision to make. The other thing is I've been trying very hard to find this footnote that says that the city is going to be unable to pay its COPs in 2032 or whatever. And I can't find it. I'm not saying it's not there, but I spent at least 3 hours today trying to find it. I didn't find it. That's okay, because I found some really other cool stuff in last year's footnotes. And I will say, this concerns me between last year's budget and this sample budget this year. We don't have the same kind of information, and maybe it was going to get put in later, I don't know. But based on last year's actual budget, it says quite unequivocally that the COP amount, which is 11.4 originally, goes down every year by $385,000 because it's a flat payment. The interest rate, it also says, does not float with inflation or other interest rates. It's a flat rate. It says it's between 2% and 5% depending on as these are retired. So I don't know what the average rate is, but it does say that in last year's. So what you have right now is a debt going down by $385,000 a year. You have interest going down, not the interest rate, the amount of interest going down each year. So actually the amount the city owes goes down every single year. Great. That's good. That's what everybody thought. Now I want to talk about what's actually happening in the market right now. We're conservatively going to have an inflation rate of between what, 7 and 10%? That's just inflation. Okay, assessments are another issue. So we're going to have, I think our revenues from assessments, they're estimating are at, what, conservative 20-25%? Mine probably go up 100%, but hey. So let's say that revenue is going up by conservatively 20%. Inflation will eat 10% of that. So it's going up 10%. Now we look at the COPs. Somebody is holding debt that is accruing interest at 2% with inflation at 10. The city is getting free money. And the issue going forward, and even if you can get, there's no sign that interest rates are going to drop to the old rates. The interest rates, I don't know where they're going to be, but they're not dropping. The issue in the next couple years is not going to be, is the city in a position where it doesn't have the money to pay its COPs. The issue is going to be who's going to go negotiate with these bondholders to see who's going to take a substantial cut in order to discount in order to get rid of a 2% bond. They do not have the right to make that demand, which is in the footnotes, by the way. We can. We can say we want to pay it off, and there's rates. But they can't make us pay it off. So we're getting free money, and they can't make us change. It is a really, if there's anything you want to say nice about inflation, this is good. The city is getting free money and has options it wouldn't have had before. And that's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor Griswold. Appreciate it. Anybody else wish to speak? Not signed up? Nope. We'll go on to the next item, which is the consent agenda. Actually, reports from boards and commissions. You report? No, good. Consent agenda.
I just wanted to remove the minutes from September 20th briefly for one minor correction.
Sure.
So I will approve move to approve items 6B and C.
Have a motion and a second?
Second.
Motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
And then I just want, and I'm sorry that Laura's not here, but hey, Laura, on page 4, in the second paragraph, it starts out Earl Holen, Cherry Hills Land Preserve Advisory Board Member. He's just a board member, not an advisory board member. So that's it. I move to approve then item 6A with that correction.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right. Unfinished. We have no new business. But we go to reports now. I have a brief report. Just to bring us up to speed, we haven't met for a while. On October 12th, I hosted our regional mayors, Lance, Sierra, Schlachter, Pico at our Pinos. So we gave business to our business district here, and sales tax was, I'm sure, big on that amount. We also, on the 19th, we had the retirement ceremony for Commander Weathers, which was terrific. I mean, really, really nice. And well attended. Earl was there. I know that several of you were there. It was a very, very nice ceremony after his many, many years, 40 years in the city. And then also for the promotion of the new sergeants as well. On the 20th and 21st, we had a mayor's summit in Denver for mayors all over Colorado, and a lot of discussion about best practices in communities, and also the General Assembly outlook for the 2023 session. One of the best events I've been to in a long time was on the 29th of October, the Highline Canal cleanup, which we had the Highline Canal Conservancy, Harriet, and had people there. It was terrific. It was 10 to 12, and we went down into the Highline and pulled out the old brush and things from that was clogging the Highline Canal ways there, and brought it up to get it out of the way. And there were tremendous piles. It was a lot of work, and it was great. I mean, great activity, and people were there from all over, from Denver, from Aurora, all kind of chipping in and helping out. It was a tremendous day and got a lot of work done, and it looks great. If you want to go down there, peek down into the Highline Canal down there and see how much the cleanup affected it. I wanted also to mention, and Chris can add in on this, on the 31st, we met with the new Region 1 director for CDOT, which was very interesting. She actually has almost a new staff now. And she talked a lot about the funding issues that they're talking about and what's coming along, what their plans are for major highway funding and construction. All the mayors of the municipalities were there, and also representatives from Denver, Aurora. She talked about priorities, and one thing that was interesting was they said that the bridges, they have to keep the bridges, no more than 10% of the bridges can be on poor condition, or else the federal government can step in and actually direct what the state has to spend money, so they keep it within that amount. But obviously that's their main focus, and a lot of their money is repairing bridges, and a lot of those along I-25. That has implications for the Bellevue interchange, because the bridge there, this is Spooey that would need to be blown up, is not in bad shape. So that's an issue, of funding of priorities for CDOT. But I did talk to the director, and she's well aware of the Bellevue interchange issues and how that's going. But that is what we're facing there. So some of the other bridges are priority bridges around in Region 1, and they get money first. But if we can find money someplace else to pay for the bridge on Bellevue, that would be a good deal. Also, I want to mention on the 27th, several of us were at the Cherry Hills Village Art Commission, met with the artist Joe Norman, who has some art that sculptures that he is suggesting for Mead Park. They're beautiful. I was blown away. I thought they were some of the best things I've seen. I think I was just really excited by the direction that the Art Commission is taking and what they've done. I thought it was terrific. It was awesome. I want to give staff kudos, too, for cleaning up University and the islands along Quincy, and and near Hamden. They look great. Thank you very much. I really, really appreciate that. It really makes improves the looks of our community. And I will raise too for council, just that I've had, and Chris is working on, a request from some residents on Parkway Drive to potentially do something about cut-through traffic on Parkway. Parkway comes off of Hamden. And people can use it to cut over to Quincy and out south if the traffic is really heavy on Hamden. We're talking with those residents about additional stop signs, or potentially closing down Parkway even at Hamden. And so that's the issue that they're raising and we're looking at. And it may make a lot of sense. Obviously, we're just talking about it now, but it'll be a lot of discussion and conversations with more of the neighbors. But I have met with most of the neighbors who live along Parkway Drive. And that's my report.
No report.
A brief report on the west side. In the last couple of months, we've had several events. One, the Oktoberfest, and then last night there was a Halloween parade that took place. So it's great to see that camaraderie within the neighborhood. End of report.
So I just had one thing that I wanted to bring up for perhaps future consideration. I remember years ago, we passed the fence ordinance that was recommended by Planning and Zoning, and I believe Parks and Trails weighed in on that as well. And I think it's had some really great effects on the city, but I think it might be time, now that it's been in place for a while, to do a little bit of a reevaluation, and in particular, the part of the fence ordinance that requires replacement of more than 25% of a fence to bring the entire fence up to full compliance with the code. And while I understand the intention of that, and I think the intention was, well, let's help people along in compliance with this code, in reality, the effect that it's had is that people just aren't replacing their dilapidated, falling over fences. And I think those individuals are frustrated. They would like to do the right thing. And so I think we have perhaps incentivized the opposite of what we were trying to accomplish. And so I would like to ask, if fellow council members agree, if that could be brought up for discussion again at some point in the future. And I know not immediately. I think Paul has his hands full with the master plan and et cetera. But I did just want to bring it up to all of you to kind of get just a thumbs up or whatever. Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Councilor Wheel.
Thanks. No report.
No report, Mayor, but if I may just take a minute to talk about something that I think I want to make sure our folks in the village are aware of. You may have heard in the news about Women's Life Freedom Movement, what is happening overseas. And there have been demonstrations almost every week in front of the Capitol here in Colorado. Over 1,000 people have been showing up in support of the women that are being raped, beat up, burned alive, and you name it, overseas, in Iran in particular. And I encourage you guys to read about hashtag Women Life Freedom, see what's happening over there. We're all one. So what is happening in other places, if we don't act on, or if we don't show our disapproval, trust me, it will come back to haunt us. So I encourage you to come, read about it. Although all the news media is pretty much avoiding it, all the newspapers in Colorado are avoiding it, while the social media is filled up with all kinds of videos and news and everything else that you can see with your own eyes. So I would encourage you, read about it, educate yourself, and again, we would love to have you come. The demonstrations are all on Saturdays from 3 to 5 in front of the Capitol, and this week there will also be demonstrations on Sunday from 4 to 6 in Boulder. That's all, thank you.
Doug and Jay, if you guys have any reports.
Sure. The Quincy undergrounding is 99% done. There will be 2 more poles removed. They are part of the Southmore undergrounding, right at the intersection of Holly and Quincy. Those will be coming down as the Southmore project wraps up. The Southmore project, we hope it doesn't turn into another Quincy, was supposed to be done around Labor Day. So XL, we've been pushing them as fast as we can to get that project complete before it freezes and get those poles out. And on the mayor's note, the park staff took about 30 yards of debris off of the High Line this morning from the cleanup. So it was a very large amount. It was great. So.
And Jay, just real quick, I believe that we had provided an update to City Council that we had temporarily suspended the ability for Excel to get permits.
Yes. So while we were trying to get the Quincy undergrounding done, the only option we had was to shut down all of XL's permits. That seemed to do the trick. They had it done in the 8-day deadline that we gave them. So that did work.
It was not without headaches and caused real issues for some folks, including us. But it was necessary. We'd waited too long.
I do have a couple of items tonight. One is very good news. If council could put on their board of directors hats for the Charlotte Park GID. During the budget process for 23, we determined that there were excess fund balances because the project that was, I think it was a utility undergrounding from a few years ago, actually the project costs came in lower than what was anticipated. So there are some excess funds that can be used to pay down the bond principal. And unfortunately, the bond ordinance did say that it couldn't be, bonds could not be called before 2029. Well, we called the bank, which is the loan bondholder for the $375,000, and they have agreed to take a prepayment on those bonds. So you will be seeing on November 15th a budget amendment to do that prepayment this year on December 1st. So that's what we're hoping to do. So anyway, that won't be a surprise to everyone. And that will be, it should be a significant savings. So I'll wait to surprise you of that amount
That's
when
good
that
news.
packet is delivered. What's that?
That's good news. Thank you.
Yeah. And then one other item, and it's funny timing because the resident had actually talked about the long-range financial forecast, and I'm thrilled that the community here really knows and understands the value of that forecast. But I do want to kind of clarify some information about that long-range forecast. And we do try to update that forecast every year during the budget process for council. But this year with the ballot, not knowing really what the future is going to bring with revenues, we delayed that update. And this is a best practice for government finance officers, but that we can't really hang our hat on those long-range financial plans. We look at revenue assumptions, expenditure assumptions for one point in time. The next week, all of those assumptions could change. We look at economic conditions, we look at political environments, we look at possible council policy. So there's a lot of different variables that go into determining that long-range financial forecast. And I know council's been through that before, so you understand that. But I just want to clarify that for public because that financial forecast is not the budget. And it doesn't mean in 2023 and 2024, council is going to be adopting that financial forecast as the annual budget. So it is a great fiscal management tool, and it provides council with a lot of great information, and it can look out in the future to see if there's going to be a budget structural deficit. So how can council possibly make some adjustments now to avoid that from happening? So that's kind of what the goal is and objective is for those long-range financial forecasts. So hopefully early next year, we'll be able to provide some information for council to look at and update that financial forecast.
Great. City Attorney.
Nothing from us.
So I do have a couple reports. Channeling my inner Paul Workman, who's not here tonight. The master plan is scheduled and on track still to be considered by Planning and Zoning Commission on November 9th. And I'll talk about that in just a moment. So that is good news that it's still progressing along. And then I have a series of other updates related to the schedule, channeling my inner Laura, who's also out tonight ill. So just 6 quick updates about our upcoming schedule. Just 6. Planning and zoning is scheduled for November 9th, not November 8th, the regularly scheduled occurrence. There is this other event that is annoyingly getting in the way of the master plan called the election. So we did move the planning and zoning to the next night, in case anybody's interested. City council is then scheduled for November 15th. We then have the planning and zoning commission scheduled in December, as we do every single year. There is one city council meeting and that's usually where the final budget then gets adopted on second reading. So we have the Planning and Zoning Commission on the Tuesday, December 13th, and then the City Council is always the very next night on Wednesday, and that is the case again this year, which is Wednesday, December 14th. Then we've already mentioned this at City Council. It doesn't happen every year, so I just want to make sure council's aware of it. When we have the odd situation where New Year's falls on a Sunday, everybody gets off on that Monday. A lot of folks are out of town. This is a big first meeting in January, because it will be the outgoing meeting for council members who their terms are done, and it'll also be the swearing in for the new council members, as well as the organizational meeting. So it's a huge meeting, and attendance is critical. And as a result, because of the holiday, just like this happened the last time, that meeting was canceled, and in an effort to make sure that we have everybody present, it will take place on the regularly scheduled January 17th meeting. So it's unusual. There's a lot of moving pieces. There's the election. There's all sorts of crazy things. I just want to reinforce the schedule for council's benefit for your schedules. And that is the only updates I have.
And that was in our packet too, Herb.
It is. I'm just getting it out there. Maybe somebody's watching on YouTube. Who knows, right?
Great. All right. Unless there's anything else, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Second. Any opposition? Don't hear any. Thank you all for coming. See you next time.